Hey there, YouTube. Carl Auer here from Carl Auer Photography. I want to thank you for coming back to my channel, and I hope this video is going to help you get started with sports photography. What we're going to do here today is we're going to build a kit. And I'm going to focus on Canon because that's what I shoot and that's what I know. So if you don't want Canon, I highly suggest this. After this video, I'm hopefully going to post this on Sunday. Likelihood when it's posted, most stores will be closed. But in the next week or so, go into your local camera store, pick up the Canons that I talk about today, and then ask to see other cameras comparable to them from Nikon, Pentax, Sony, and see what feels best in your hand. Because that's my first rule. What feels best in your hand. A camera is an extension of you. It's a tool, and it should feel right in your hand. If it doesn't feel right, you're not going to get the fullest out of it. So take some time, go into a camera shop, and ask some questions. You're going to have questions after I make this video. But go into a camera store and hold the different cameras. Play around with them. See how they feel in your hands. And whichever one feels good in your hands, whether it be Canon, Nikon, Sony, Olympus, Pentax, whatever, that's the camera you should go with, because in the long run it's going to continue to feel good in your hands and it's going to turn into an extension of you. So that being said, I'm going to give you prices of a kit to show you the difference between using some lenses versus others, different camera bodies, and how much you could be in for and how much you can get away with to start. This kit is at the core of any sports photographer's camera bag. And really, a lot of photographers in general, pro photographers, whether they be landscape or portrait or wedding, commercial, whatever, this is going to be their kit. And beyond being a sports focused theme, this kit is going to be able to handle a lot of things that you might want to do away from the sporting scene. Maybe you're going out on vacation, traveling, or you want to do family photos or photos around your neighborhood or your city, or go into a museum or go to the zoo or something. This is going to be a good camera kit that's going to cover a lot of different things. But we're going to mainly talk about sports here. Now, sports cameras must be responsive. When you look at Canon, there's a nice entry-level series of cameras called Rebels. I believe at any time there's 3 or 4 different types of Rebels out there. And some of them are really good. A lot of them are great for doing stuff like this, vlogging on YouTube, because they have a flip-out screen, and they're small, they're inexpensive, they accept different lenses, you can add a microphone. But when it comes to actually photographing sports, they tend to lack. And what they lack in is the frames per second. While you don't need a camera that shoots 1,000 frames a second to shoot sports, it sure does help to have those high frame rates, especially under certain circumstances or if you're trying to get a specific shot. Now, the one thing I'm going to discourage anyone from, whether they get a camera that has 3 or 4 frames per second or 12 frames per second, never mash down on the button. Mashing down on the button is what we call in the business machine gunning or spray and pray. There are times that it's okay, but it's very rare. Typically, you want to be more like a sniper and shoot short bursts of 3 to 4 photos, sometimes less. But for the most part, a good professional sports photographer could go out with a single frame advanced camera and capture some phenomenal images. Having that frames per second, though, the high frames per second, just increases not only your chances of getting a great photo, but the amount of great photos you can walk away with. So we're going to talk about cameras first. And there are 2 different flavors of cameras that most manufacturers make today. There's a full frame, and then there's something called APS-C. Now, APS stands for Advanced Photo System. Kodak introduced this back in the late days of film. They introduced a whole new series of cameras. Canon EOS actually made, I believe it was called the IX, which was an APS camera. And these film cartridges, they didn't have a lead coming out like a 35 millimeter roll. They were smaller than 35 millimeters, but you could do some cool features on or functions on some of the cameras. Some cameras would allow you to shoot a standard 2x3 image, which is typically most 35 millimeter negatives are printed out 4x6, 2x3. You could do a 16:9 HD print. They labeled it HD because at that time, standard televisions that are out now, flat screens that are widescreen, 16:9 aspect ratio, they were just new on the market and HD was the thing, so they named the 16:9 HD. And then they also included a panoramic version where it was maybe a double HD, maybe a little bit wider, but they all came from the same negatives. You could have all of those pictures on one roll of negatives, and it was kind of cool. But film was dying. The sensor size of cameras, though, utilized that APS size sensor and the full frame sensor. Canon for years offered one camera that was full frame, and it was expensive. It was the Canon EOS 1DS, and they made 3 different versions of that: the Mark IIs, or the S Mark II, and the 1DS Mark III. After the Mark III and the EOS 1D series that went to Mark IV, they merged the lines into one, the 1DX. Now, the 1DX is a photojournalist's, sports photographer's dream camera, along with the Nikon D5. The problem is, for people starting out, like you might be, I'm not going to generalize everyone that's watching this video. I know there are going to be some people that have a great background in photography, know a lot about photography, are ready for a camera like a 1DX series. But they can be overwhelming for people who are not familiar with cameras or haven't gone beyond much a beginning photography class or just pointing and shooting a camera on automatic settings. The 1D series is a workhorse of a camera. It's a beast, and it's expensive. And we'll get to that pricing in a little bit. I've got some printouts to read off some pricing for you. But we're going to focus really, starting out, you want to look at the APS-C. Now, the APS-C cameras give you a benefit when you're starting out, especially on a low budget. The APS-C, there's a crop factor involved with whatever you're shooting. It's all done in camera, so you don't have to think, oh my gosh, I'm shooting this and I need to multiply it by this and that. You don't have to do that. Easy rule of thumb, when you're using a 100mm lens on a 1DX series camera, or a 5D Mark IV, or a 6D, or I think there's a 5D RS, which is kind of an astrophysics specialist lens or camera. Those are all full frame cameras. The 5Ds and the 6Ds are not sports cameras. They make wonderful images. The quality is phenomenal. The file sizes are incredibly large, but they're not quick. The frames per second just aren't up there to where you need it for sports. But let's say you have somebody with a 1DX Mark II and a 100mm lens, and they're taking a picture of somebody, 10, 15 feet away. We'll say 15 feet away. If you're standing there with a APS-C camera body and that same 100mm lens, and you're right next to the guy shooting the subject, and you take a picture of the subject, you both look at your pictures, it's going to look like you used a 160mm lens. That's because the sensor is smaller, there's a field of view crop. It's not really a 160mm lens, it's still a 100mm lens. It's not using the entire lens. And we're going to have a video on field of view crop in a future, at a future date. But basically know that a wide-angle lens, something like a 10mm wide-angle lens, is actually going to be about 16mm on an APS-C. So you lose some on the wide end, but you gain on the long end, which is great when you're starting out because you don't have to worry about spending money on a 300 millimeter lens right away because you're going to be at 320 millimeter lens. There's 320 millimeters with a 200 millimeter lens on your APS-C body. I know that's confusing. Bear with me until we do that other video. Anyway, let's talk about those APS-C bodies. I said the Rebel series. Stay away from those. The price point is very enticing. Salespeople will talk you into them. They're not the best camera for the job. You want to look at the 80D or the 7D Mark II. The 7D Mark II is on sale right now for about, body alone, nothing included with it, between $1,300 and $1,500. If you look at the 80D, it's on sale right now for about $1,100. If you look at a grip for the 7D Mark II or a 80D, you're going to be in for another $180 to $210. The grip is important though for sports photography. The grip, the reason the grip is here is if you're shooting and you're shooting horizontal and then you go, oh, I want a vertical. Instead of holding your arms like this and shooting in an unnatural position, you have a shutter button, focus buttons, everything you need on the grip, so you can still hold it almost identical to how you're holding it horizontally. So the grip makes for, and it doubles your battery life. So that's why a grip is really important. Right here I have a 7D. Not the Mark II. I do have the Mark II, but I had this close by and I just grabbed it for this video. This is an 8 frame per second camera. The 7D Mark II is 10 frames per second, and the 80D is 7 frames per second. Now what that means is when you hold the button down for a full second, it's going to click off 7 shots. This one's going to click off 8 shots. The Mark II is going to click off 10 shots. What that does for you is it allows you to anticipate a moment and hopefully capture that peak part of that moment. Let's use baseball as an example. It's the only time that I'll hold the shutter button down longer than just a 3 or 4 shot burst. But let's say you have a batter, he's getting ready to swing, and you want to get as many shots as you can of that swing, hoping for the bat connecting with the ball. That's a killer shot for sports photography. But then maybe you also want the follow through, and maybe holding the bat out as opposed to over his shoulder is a better picture. Maybe instead of the bat behind his head, a little further out starting the swing is a better photo than behind his head. You can get 4 or 5 great shots from a batter's swing using that frames per second. Now with the 1D X Mark II, you're going to be looking at 12 frames per second. You're going to get more photos, but you're also going to have more throwaways from that. With the 7D Mark II, the 7D, or the 80D, you're going to be looking at trying to anticipate the shot a little bit more. You shoot with one eye open. If you're able to, keep an eye on the pitcher. Notice when they're in their delivery, and try shooting different times when they're in their delivery, and holding that shutter button down until the swing's over. And see if you get that bat on ball. When you know that pitcher and what their release is and where you're going to get the ball meeting the bat, then you're going to start seeing those bat on ball shots over and over and over again. Another thing to think about with the shutter speed is when you're shooting something like football, you don't want to just, when the ball's hiked, mash down on the button, and when the play's over, let go. You're not going to get anything. That's where the machine gunning and spray and pray. You're shooting, but you're not sure if you're hitting anything, and you're hoping you get something good out of it. Instead of doing that, focusing in on the quarterback. When he hikes the ball, take a short burst, 2 or 3, 4 shots. Then before you take another burst, watch. What's he doing? Is he handing off to the running back? Then before you take the next burst, move your focus a little bit, move your camera, focus it on the running back. Take a burst of him getting the ball. Then which way is he running? Is he coming towards you? Is he running straight? Is he running away from you? Get him composed. If he's running away from you, likelihood of shooting is, I mean, you should probably think about, well, I'm not going to shoot now because I'm getting his back. But if he's running forward, he might bounce over to your side, or if he's coming your way, he might be headed right at you. Start taking 3 or 4 shot bursts. Recompose. Watch. Where is he going? Shoot. Recompose. Make sure your focus is still tracking him. Shoot. Shooting in short bursts like that will increase your keeper rate greatly. You'll have more keepers that way than if you just mash the button down. I hope that makes sense. Now, talking about camera bodies, I mean, the nice thing about the 7D and the 7D and the 1D series is they only have really 4 settings. P, which is kind of like, hey, stupid, let me do the shooting for you. I don't like that. But they have TV, which is shutter priority, and they have AV, which is aperture priority. Now, if you shoot in shutter priority, you basically say, I want to shoot at 1,000th of a second shutter speed, and then the camera decides what aperture to use. That's okay. It's kind of giving you some creative control. AV is just the opposite. You set the aperture. Let's say you're in a gym and you say, I have to shoot at 2.8, so I'm going to set the camera to 2.8, and then let the camera set its shutter speed. And that's okay, but not perfect. M is the mode I shoot in 99.9% of the time, and that's manual. In a future video, we'll talk about how I get my exposure, but manual mode lets you shoot, lets you set your shutter speed and your aperture. That way, you can set what you think is best. You can use the viewfinder in the back. You can use a handheld light meter to adjust your settings, and you basically, and we'll talk about this again in a future video. You basically just want to be sure that you're not blowing out your blacks and blowing out your whites. Right there is, as long as you're not doing that, you're going to have a well-exposed photo. So 80D is cheaper. Like I said, 7D is a little more expensive, but it's a beefier camera. The 80D is going to have more features on the dial than the 7D does. It's going to have a sports mode. Don't use it. It's going to have a portrait mode. Yeah, if you take a portrait, you could try it. It's going to have a landscape mode. You know, I've never used those modes. I've always used M. And that's because I come from the film days where I had to get my exposure with a handheld meter and set it and then shoot and then check my lighting again. And you'll see me at soccer games, football games, baseball games, always pulling a hand meter out and checking the light, making sure that I don't need to adjust my camera. I don't trust the camera and the meter, and that's just me. Meters are great in cameras, and if you know how to use them properly, which I do, you can get good, accurate readings from them. But for me, it's easier just to have that handheld meter. And we'll talk about handheld meters in another video also. But let's move on to lenses. I mean, we've looked at 2 camera bodies, the 80D and the 7D Mark II. Talked about pricing on those. Now let's talk about lenses. First lens I'm going to talk about is the cheapest lens Canon makes. It's plastic, it's small, but it's probably one of their best bangs for a buck. And that is the 50mm 1.8. The 50mm 1.8 is a very fast lens. Aperture is 1.8 to 22. The 1.8 is where you want to be most of the time for sports, somewhere between the 1.8 and 2.2. 1.8 allows a lot of light to come in, giving you the opportunity to have faster shutter speeds. The more light, the higher the shutter speed. And when it comes to sports, with youth sports, a good rule of thumb is 1/500th of a second to stop the action. When you get up to high school varsity level, college, and pros, really you want to be in the 1/1000th, 1/2000th of a second because they move faster. This 50mm is great for basketball, volleyball, wrestling if you're down by the mat and you can get close up to the action. Like As a photographer that's credentialed, when I shoot high school or college wrestling they'll usually have an area for photographers, and hopefully it's very close to the mat. But with high school, I could be sitting right there at mat side, and I could have the action so close to me that I've got to move out of the way before they hit me. This 50 millimeter is great for that. I also have used the 50 millimeter as a remote lens, pointing into a dugout, getting reactions of coaches and players when a home run is hit or a strikeout or something. And it's just a great all-around lens. Beyond sports, this is a great indoor birthday party lens, or you're on a vacation and you go to a museum, and it's a great low light lens for museums that you can handhold without having to worry about carrying a tripod or a monopod with you to steady your shot. You're going to get really good shutter speeds at low light with this. But remember, 1.8 aperture, that's a very narrow depth of field, so you want to be sure your focus is locked on. $125 new. Next lens we're going to talk about is the 24 to 70 2.8. This is a Canon L lens. Canon makes really three different types of lenses. They make EFS lenses, which are only for the APS-C cameras. They won't fit on the full frame cameras or the film camera. And then they make just standard prosumer EF lenses. And then they make EF-L lenses. L is... Somebody told me once that L stood for luxury, but it's just their professional series. They're more expensive than most other lenses, and there are lenses in the L series that you just can't get in any other series. You might find some lenses, like there'll be a 24 to 70, 3.5 to 5.6 lens for $300, something like that. But this L lens is 24 to 70 with a constant 2.8 aperture across the focal range. This is a great indoor or remote lens. Indoor basketball you could get from half court to under the basket, nice wide shots. Volleyball, same thing. You can, if you're sitting courtside, you can really focus in on people making digs and dives and still be able to zoom in to people further back serving or maybe on the opposite side of the court. As a remote lens, I've used it for soccer. I've used it for baseball, Little League baseball, T-ball level, setting up very close to the batter so I could get very close shots without actually being there, putting my body in harm for throwing bats or whatever. It's just a great all-around lens, and it's a great travel lens. If you're out walking around a city or stuff, you can get great cityscapes with this. You can get great people photos with it. It's just a great all-around lens. This one retails for right now it's on sale for about $1,800, $1,750-ish. So it's not a cheap lens, but it's a great lens. The next lens we're going to talk about is probably the most used lens by any sports photographer. That's the 70 to 200 2.8. The 70 to 200 2.8 is now on a 1D series body. It would likely be a second lens. If I'm shooting football, having a 600 millimeter or a 400 millimeter lens on my main camera will be on a monopod. This lens would be on a camera probably around my neck. So I would throw that 300 or 400 or 600 over my shoulder and pick up the 70 to 200. And when a play happens, like if a play breaks at the 50-yard line and they get closer to like the 30 or 20 and he's running towards me, that's when I want the shorter zoom. I want to be able to show his whole body, him running. Grabbing that second body and then being able to put it back down and pick up a lens camera with like this lens on it for a touchdown celebration. I mean, I'll constantly shoot with 2, 3, 4 cameras at a sporting event. But we're talking about one camera right now. One camera, 3 lenses. The 70 to 200 I've used as a remote. Used it on a baseball remote, putting it on top of a dugout, pointing it right at third base, at about 150 millimeters. That allows me to get runners sliding into third, rounding third, a third baseman. If he snags a ball on the line, I can grab it with a remote camera there with this lens on it. I've had this lens pointing right up the third base line behind the dugout or behind the fence, the backstop, pointing right up third base line, getting the runner coming right at home. It's a great versatile lens. It's great for basketball and wrestling and volleyball. You can zoom in. You can get really close. With this and the APS-C body, shooting down court is no problem. So those three lenses, the camera body and the grip, that's your beginning kit. Oh, and this lens, this is a great lens to give you an example. Let's say you're shooting softball and you're standing next to someone in a media box. Let's say you're shooting softball and you're standing next to a guy who has, let's say, a Nikon D5 or a Canon 1DX Mark II and a 300 millimeter lens on that camera. And he's standing there and you've got your 80D or your 7D Mark II and you've got this 70 to 200. Well, you've got a 70 to 200, he's got a 300. Man, he's going to get that reach and he's going to be able to cover the entire infield. Remember, the field of view crop on that 7D or that 80D is giving you the equivalent of 320 millimeters. So you're getting 20 millimeters more throw, basically, than the guy with the 300 millimeter lens is. And that's great. I mean, that means that you can really, with this lens and a body like this, you can realistically cover the entire infield, including the batter, the pitcher, and the catcher. You should be able to reach the outfielder closest to you. And with something like softball or even baseball, you don't shoot on one side specifically because you're going to have batters that will bat with their back to you. So you want to go to the other side of the field. The other side, if you start on the first base side, you want to shoot on the third base side some too. And that way, you're going to be close to the other fielder. While you're on the first base side, you can get the right fielder catching a ball or throwing the ball. When you go to the third base side, you can get the left fielder. Sometimes you'll have to look at options for getting the center fielder because they will be a little too far away. Maybe they run in for a short ball or they're backing up the left fielder or the right fielder. So you may luck out there. But you can cover just about the entire field with this lens and an APS-C body. So I want to talk about pricing now. Now, first, we're going to talk about the price of the 1D camera, the 1DX, and a Canon IS lens, a lens that's a step up from this, and the 24-70 from Canon, and the 50 millimeter. Those four items, 3 lenses, 1 camera, and this is not including shipping, tax, memory cards. The camera will come with the battery, charger, but you'll need to get a memory card for it, which could be anything from $20, $30 to a few $100s, depending on the size and speed you get. You're looking at, before taxes and shipping, $9,822 for that kit. Now, take away that 1DX and let's look at the 7D Mark II pricing. Is with the L lenses, the Canon 70-200, Canon 24-70, and the Canon 50, you're looking at $5,381. That's about $4,500 cheaper than the 1DX. The 80D with the Canon L IS lens, the Canon EF 24-70 2.8 lens, the battery grip, the body, and that 50 millimeter lens, you're looking at $5,101.95. Again, about $4,700, give or take, cheaper than the Canon 1DX. But now you might be sitting there going, $5,100, I can't spend that. You don't have to. If somebody asks me, I will always tell them, Canon lenses, great. But if you're on a budget, there are alternatives that are almost as good as the Canons. When I started out, I used a Sigma 70-200 2.8. And when I started out, that lens brand new was about $650, $700. They've gone up in price now, but compared to over $1,500 for the Canon at the time, that was a great deal. With the 7D, the grip, 7D Mark II and grip, the Canon 50mm 1.8, and then a Tokina ATX 24-70 f2.8 Pro FX lens. $879. That is almost $900 cheaper than the Canon version of the lens. And then throw on top of that a Tamron 70-200 f2.8 DI-LD-IF lens. $769. That is $1,200 less than the Canon version. Your price with the 7D and the grip for that package, $3,331.95. $3,331.95. Remember, tax and shipping not included in that price. But that is just about $2,050 cheaper than using the Canon lenses. With the 80D, you're at $3,052.90, which is about $2,100, $2,050 cheaper. So they're about the same. But so you can really, for just over $3,000, you can get the Canon EOS 80D body, you can get a battery grip, and you can get a 70-200 from Tamron, a Tokina 24-70, and the Canon 50mm 1.8. And have money left over compared to, I mean, now that kit, while it's not the 1D, and it's not all Canon lenses, you've still got a basic sports kit that is going to almost perform like the almost $10,000 Canon 1DX. So over $9,822 or $3,052.90, I'd go the $3,052.90 route any day when I was starting out. Now, let's say you go with the Tokina and Tamron lenses, and you go with the 80D, and you go out and you start shooting your sports. Hopefully you've watched my credential video, so you're not trying to do something that you shouldn't be doing with the wrong level sports. But let's say you go out, let's say you have a kid or a brother or a sister or a grandchild or a nephew, niece, whatever, who's playing Little League softball. And you go out and you start shooting with this gear. And you say, you know, I got some better photos than I ever imagined using this kit. But that lens just didn't seem to focus fast enough. Or I wanted to go a little wider or a little longer. Or maybe the camera was, you know, the camera does good, but it almost it made me feel like I was lacking somewhere. Well, maybe you want to upgrade that 80D to a 7D Mark II. Maybe you do need to look at longer lenses. But that's the whole point of this kit. This is a core kit. And when you start feeling the need that, oh, I need something wider, or I need something longer, or I need something faster, then you start adding to it. So I'm going to end this video, and all I'm going to say is, Whatever camera you pick, Nikon, Canon, Minolta, or Sony now, Olympus, Pentax, whatever you pick, whatever lenses you get, whatever level body you get, practice. Keep shooting all the time. The more you shoot, the better you get. Read the manuals. Don't be a guy about this and go, I don't need this stinking manual. Yeah, you do. I carry the manuals for my cameras with me in my camera bag because there's always going to be something that comes up. Ooh, can I do this? I think I can. How do I do it? Pull the manual out because there's so many features in these cameras, you can't remember how to do everything. Keep shooting, keep shooting, keep shooting. We're going to get into editing. We're going to get into more talks about field of view, exposure, metering, white balance, all sorts of things in future videos. So if you're using this and you want to learn how to become a better sports photographer, hit the subscribe button down there. Hit the little bell next to the subscribe after you've subscribed. That'll let you know when a new video goes up. And if you like this video, if you like what you heard, smash on that like button. Until next time, keep shooting. I'm Carl Auer, and I hope you enjoyed this video.